Okay, this is started making my Anna coronation dress skirt. I've bought the simplicity pattern that came out. After doing a mock-up, a lot of the skirt panel pieces that came with it were a little bit long for me, so I've turned those under a bit. Now, this was my original mock-up. Yes, this is how all our stuff starts out, believe it or not. I'm just trying to get the idea and work out how long my pieces are going to be. Started out with what is called the skirt trim with the pattern on. It did originally come with separate appliques that use fusible facing or something, and we tried it, and to be honest it made more of a mess than anything, so I decided to hand paint mine. The fabric I'm using for my trim, I think it's showing up a bit grey here on the light, but it's actually a pale olive green. Got it from the Fancy Silk store in Birmingham. It's kind of a thin version of a Duchess satin, or somewhere between a thick silk satin and a Duchess satin. I'm not actually sure what it was called. But basically you take your piece, you cut it to the size and the length that you need for your trim, and then you press under with the iron, or sorry, I've overlocked the edges first, then pressed under with the iron, about half a centimetre or so in. I then get some trace down paper, which I'll show you in a minute, and you put your trace down paper on your fabric, and then you put the trim over the top, so you'd have this, and then you'd put that over the top of it. Imagine that your trace down paper is between the two, and then I pressed with a pencil really hard, and then when the trace down paper comes off it leaves a red mark underneath where you've drawn your pattern. So then I've just gone and hand painted this all myself by hand. I could embroider it, but I don't fancy spending a few months on this one, folks, so I didn't really want this one to drag on in particular. Altogether I've cut 10 of these, like so. Here they are, all hanging up. Go. Next, for the skirt front and back they call it, which the decorative trim will go on the top of, I bought this sage green Duchess satin. I bought 4 metres when we only needed 3. There we go. It's a little bit thicker, this one. It's quite a heavy Duchess satin, this one. Got this sage green fabric from Cheap Fabrics, cheapfabrics.co.uk. Luckily it wasn't too expensive, $5.99 a metre. That's sage green. Now, after some experimenting and following the pattern instructions, it says to cut your skirt front and back out of your light green fabric, which is my sage green here, and then it says to get your trim, have the edges turned over like I pressed earlier on, and then what you would do is you fold the edges over on both sides. You then sew across the top, sew down one side, I leave the bottom open, and then start on the other side and sew that down as well. But all this created is lots of air bubbles trapped in between and a horrible rippling effect, very much like what you can see is going on here already. And it says also to zigzag over the edge, which I felt after trying that didn't look very nice. So we're going to try this other method instead, which works a lot better, and I recommend it more than what it says in the pattern.
Okay, because we weren't happy with the first version of putting the trim onto the middle, it didn't work out for us. So what we've decided to do is follow the example of another person who actually cut it into 3 strips and then put it together. So that's what we've decided to do on ours. So using the pattern piece, let's lay it onto the material, and then where you've got your dotted line there, just mark about a seam width in on both sides at the bottom. Seam width is about 5/8 of an inch, which is the usual measurement for a seam width. And then going to the top, measure across the top here, and it's 104 centimetres, so I'm going to halve that, which is 52, and then just put a mark for the middle. Now using a tape measure or the longest rule that you have, line up the top dot with one of the dots at the bottom, like so. This gives you a very straight edge. Then get your marker, and then just draw a line between those 2 points. But this time go to the next marker and draw your line again. Then I'm going to get my cutting board, get onto there. Now, using this very good gadget that you can buy quite cheaply, either off the internet or at your local market or haberdashery, it usually comes with a selection of blades. You've got a flat blade and a wavy blade, and then this is your pinking blade. So I've put that in to do the next job. Take a ruler and line up your dots. And then just run your blade up it. Okay, now that we've done that, I'm going to find a good reference if I know which pieces go with which. So I'm going to just write on the top of these, that's the outside, that's the centre, and that's the outside, so I don't get them mixed up. So I put those together, and I'm also going to take the painted section, put that together and just pin it for now, so I don't lose track of all my pieces, and now I shall do that for every single piece.
Okay, we've now sewn the seams down each side, like so, and it should look like this after you've given it a press with the iron. This is a section of what they call the pleat underlay, which is the green part underneath. I've gone for a grassy green, it doesn't quite show up as well on the camcorder, shows up a slightly bluey colour for some reason, but it's a lightweight fabric again. It's exactly the same fabric as I used to do my decorative trim with the painting on. Again, I don't know what it's called. It's something between a silk satin and a Duchess satin, that's all I can say. A little bit weighty, but not too heavy, not too stiff, and not too light either.
This is a very big skirt, and so it requires a lot of pressing as well. When you've put all your panels together, like so, then we'll start doing the pressing. These have got to be facing in, and the next one's in as well. So once I've pressed it on this side, I then turn it over and press all the seams again on the right side, making sure that all the seams are still pointing in. I'm going to press all the seams again, but this time on the edges of all the panels. What I'm going to do is turn it over, but make sure that I can see a small part of the panel before I actually press that down with a steam iron. And I'm going to do that with all the seams. Make sure that a small part of the panel is actually turned under when you press it. Okay, now that you've done all of your seams, allowing for a little bit of the decorated panel to go underneath, then go to your infill panels and halfway along each one put a small marked dot at the bottom and one at the top. Fold each panel at the top inwards until you come to the mark halfway, and then put a pin into that, and then coming down the bottom, make sure that your skirt is straight, and do the same for the bottom one. Take the bottom panel and line it up with the mark at the bottom, making sure that your skirt is perfectly straight when you do this. Okay, I've closed up that. This is showing the underneath, what it will look like, and what we're going to do is create our creases. So with that lying exactly flat and your pieces lining up, I'm going to run hot iron over where the creases are to create our folds. When you've pressed all the seams from the right side, turn the whole skirt over with all the pins still in place, and then give all the pieces another good pressing. The last bit of pressing will involve taking out all the pins that held your panel, and with an iron just go over any pin marks or creases that shouldn't be there.
Next, starting from your last box pleat, you want to run a sewing line across the top. to help hold the pleats in place.
Next thing we're going to do is put in a 6-inch invisible zip into the very last panel.
Now finish putting the rest of your invisible zip in. To save me explaining how to do this, there are many tutorials out there to show you how to put an invisible zip in. Or you can just follow one of my tutorials on another video. Next, cut out your waistband. This should be a couple of inches longer than your waist measurement. And mine is approximately 8 centimetres wide. Now take your waistband and fold it in half and get an iron and press a good hard crease in all the way along.
Right, we've now sewn on the waistband and we've gone right to the end, and this is the point where you can turn in the very last insert of your skirt and sew that down flat, and we've done that all the way along on the end, and we've done the same at that end. Now we're going to put a bit of stiffener into the waistband as we go. So you get your stiffener and put it into the seam edge inside there, and then it would be helpful if you just pinned it down now and again to hold it in place. Make sure it's taut. Then at the end we're going to turn in the end seam, turn up the bottom one like so, then we're going to turn a seam at the top, and then we're going to double the whole thing over like that. So you should end up with something that looks like that. And I'm just going to put a pin in here for now to hold it until it gets sewn. And we're going to hand sew very tiny stitches down that end piece where it's open, and then hand sew these two pieces together up to your skirt so it's nice and neat. And then for the rest of it, you're going to make sure that your stiffener is in properly, pinned in place. Turn a seam on your waistband, turn it over, pulling it reasonably tight so you can just about see your sewing line. I'm going to put a pin there. Just to hold that in place. And you're going to do that all the way along. Push your stiffener in. Put a pin on the outside if it'll make you feel a bit better and keep it more secure. Turn your seam and then pin that down. Sorry, it's not cooperating right now. Bit fiddly, but you're aiming for that sewing line and do that all the way across until you get to the end.
Last thing to do is just put some hooks and eyes on. You want this to be fairly tight because the skirt's quite heavy. It might help if you just had somebody to place those on the waistband for you. Okay, we've now got the task of hemming up the outer skirt. As you can see, it's all been pinned at the moment, and we've left this till last because it needs to be tried over the petticoats, and with the other petticoat having a lot of net underneath it, it pushes the skirts out. So it's not really a good idea trying to level your outer skirt until your petticoats are done, if you're going to go with that option. We've pinned it and folded it to where it's level on me. It'd be helpful you have somebody do this for you. So we're just giving it a really good press. You'll see the one problem we have with this is the many different colours in the skirt, which makes it hemming up with a machine stitch a bit more tricky because of matching your colours if you were to just hem it up as normal. So you've got your greens and then your lighter greens and then your olive greens. It says in the instructions in the pattern to put this hemming tape in and to do what they call an invisible stitch, which we did try and we weren't really too happy with the results on a test piece. So I'm going to try this hemming web. It's 25mm wide, 10 meters of it, and it's fusible and it has like a sticky glue on both sides. This actually fuses two pieces of fabric together. You can get other fusible types of tape that only have the sticky on one side, but this one has it on both sides. So we're going to try and go with that.
The width of your webbing, or the webbing that we are using, is 2.5 centimeters. So when the hem is cut off the bottom of the skirt, we'll need to make that 3 centimeters so that it covers over the webbing when you iron it. If you don't do that, then the webbing will get stuck on your iron. After you've pinked all around the edge of the hem, place in your webbing up against the crease and turn it over, and then pin it all in place ready for ironing. Once you've ironed in the web, then you're gonna have to iron all your creases back in at the bottom of the skirt.
Last thing you want to do is just paint the last pattern on the bottom, which is why I left the last leaf design till last, because I wanted to wait till it was turned up properly to give me an idea of how big I'll need it.